Hey, friends, welcome to the Deeper Bible podcast. We're a show about God's wisdom for everyone. And we want to go really deep into the scriptures, but also into big ideas in theology, philosophy, culture, and how it all lands in our daily life. So, super glad you're here. And if you do us a favor, if this is helpful, do all the things, click like, subscribe, comment, all the stuff. That's always very helpful. My name's Ryan, and today we're going to explore the overlap of two highly charged worlds. On the one hand, the world of business and corporate consulting. On the other hand, the world of the church. And how do these things overlap? In fact, they do in many ways. And with me to help think through this is someone who has lived in both spaces in their very high-profile overlap. She's my friend Nancy Ortberg, and I'm going to brag on you for just a second, Nancy, introduce you to our friends who are listening. So Nancy's currently the CEO of an organization. It's called Transforming the Bay with Christ, and it brings together a lot of churches in the Bay Area, and the goal is to catalyze a holistic gospel movement, and she leads an amazing team of people, and there's some exciting stuff going on in the Bay Area, and she's at the tip of the spear of that. She worked closely in this project with a man named Patrick Gelsinger, who is the chairman of the board, and he's also the CEO of a little-known microelectronics firm called Intel. So he's a great guy. And then before coming to Transforming the Bay, Nancy had an amazing resume. She was at Willow Creek for a number of years as a teaching pastor during the time when that was really a standard-bearing church of American evangelicalism. She's founded and run a leadership consulting firm. She's written books. She does amazing work with her husband, John, who's a great writer and speaker. And so she's done a lot of really, really cool stuff with her life. And so, Nancy, thanks for making time for this.
Glad to be here. Hope I can live up to that.
Oh yeah, well, I have no doubt. I have no doubt. So let me dig into this into the question a little bit deeper. As you know, I'm a young pastor at one of these evangelical multi-site churches, and coming from academia, where the stuff in the water is different, especially in the humanities, I've just been amazed at how much in the water sort of managerial, corporate, business speak, best practices is in the water of the way that we run church. And that has produced in me two conflicting reactions. On the one hand, it's like, hey, this is actually helpful stuff, and this is really smart, and we should do this. This is helping our mission. On the other hand, it gives me pause, because it's like, well, ecclesiology has this rich vision of what the church is as the people of God, disciples of Christ, citizens of heaven, and there's this danger that the identity of the church is watered down through sort of corporate speak, trends, and so forth. I've got a bunch of sub questions, but I'll just start right there. Like, how do you approach the overlap of these two worlds? What have you seen? How do you approach that question?
Well, you've described the tension really well. And in fact, when I get done answering your question, I'd love to go back and ask you, where have you seen the corporate speak taking over the robust ecclesiology of the church? I'd love to dig into maybe some more specific examples.
Absolutely.
But where I would start is by saying, anytime something becomes more complex, it needs infrastructure. That could be a family. That could be a family-run business. It could be a farm. It could be a church. It could be a corporation.
Yeah.
So one of the great gifts, I think, in the last numbers of years, and I think Willow was one of those churches, was to bring in best practices from the business world and to say, what can we learn from these? Mm-hmm. Now, like anything, when we're in learning mode, we often swing a pendulum because we're so enamored by the new learning, because it's helping. Yeah. And I think the most important part is to put it in its right place, where the vision of the church is always the guiding force. Mm-hmm. And the good business practices become the supplemental infrastructure and really necessary for the running of the vision, but they never become the vision.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How does that play out in terms of decision-making processes for senior leadership? Because as you're are you thinking in terms of return on investment? Are you thinking in cost benefit? Or are you thinking, Jesus, I'm going to go leave those 99 sheep and go for that one, which sounds like a terrible idea if you're thinking about the bottom line.
It really does. Unless you're a good enough shepherd to know the 99 are going to be okay.
Yeah.
You're in the pen.
That's true.
You're taken care of.
Yeah.
I don't think Jesus opened the gate and let the 99 out and went to go find the one.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about competing values,
Yeah.
and that's where it's really critical to go back to what is the mission and vision of this organization,
Yeah.
and how can those business practices serve that? So let's go back to your example when it comes to decision making.
Hmm.
Return on investment is probably not at the highest level of value in a church. Plus, it would be very difficult to measure in an organization like a church.
Right.
Very difficult. But can our decision making processes get better by the things we learn from business? Absolutely. And ironically, I have found often that some of the best practices in decision making in corporations are actually quite values driven and quite biblically based.
Right.
This collaboration,
Right.
feedback loops,
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
making sure that everybody's on board before you move ahead. Now, not to the extent where you wouldn't move ahead, but you're right. An organization that is primarily driven by shareholder interests is going to have a little bit of a different decision-making process than a church.
Hmm.
But I think sometimes in our churches, without putting those business practices into practice, we get sloppy,
Hmm.
and we get one leader calling most of the shots,
Hmm.
which is rarely healthy.
Yeah. So if you were to identify a handful of contributions that mode of thinking has contributed to the church in the last couple decades, what would you identify as a few of those?
Well, what I would start off with is what I just said is like collaborative decision making,
Hmm.
not to the point of paralysis, but really the
Hmm.
belief that the team is the most important part. It's more important than the leader,
Hmm.
and that whatever leadership strengths I have, I also bring liabilities. And if I'm really clear on members of the team, I'm going to sit there and say, Ryan, you've been kind of quiet in this meeting. I really need to hear what you think, because
Hmm.
moving forward, if we're going to make the best possible decision, your input is really critical at this point. It
Hmm.
is so honoring of people. Um, that is really biblically based values. So
Hmm.
I think a collaborative decision making process. I think feedback on decision making once it's been made. How do you have a loop where you really do have these honest and therefore probably painful conversations about what worked and what didn't?
Hmm.
And then maybe pre decision making, it is how do we um, use our resources wisely and do our research and divide up into sub teams and really get as much information as we possibly can at the table so that we can make a good decision. Those are all great business practices that I
Hmm.
think the church benefits from studying.
Hmm. Yeah, there's a young lady in our church who just finished an MBA, and she was telling me, it was so much teamwork based. And even though it was like supposed to be I thought it was a leadership degree, but we ended up just like working in teams all the time. And boy, did I need the fruit of the spirit for that.
Yes.
And I found that fascinating.
Yeah. One of the one of the men on the board of the organization I run is a venture capitalist, and he's probably one of the best leadership coaches I've ever had. And I was in his
Mm,
office one day, and
mm,
in the big white on the big whiteboard in the bottom right hand corner were just three words: idea, leader, team. Really over in the corner, and it was from a meeting he had before I got in there, and he said to me, "Which of those three do you think is the most important?" And I just said, "This feels like a trick question. I don't know how to answer it." But he said it's the team. He said ideas are only 5% of predictive success.
mm,
Any leader is limited. I bet my money on the team.
mhm.
And when you think about Jesus, in in two of the four gospels, Jesus put a team together before the second chapter was over. And in the
Yeah.
third gospel, it was before the fourth chapter. And this was not a Phi Beta Kappa team. This was kind of a mess.
Right.
But if Jesus was saying, I need a team, and that's what I want to base the kingdom on going forward, we need
Right.
to pay attention to that.
Right. I learned this lesson. I ate some humble pie uh, when I lived in Israel. So when I was 20, I broke my neck. I dropped out of school. Traumatic story. Um, and I was living with this little community in Jerusalem that
Remember
does
this.
some NGO style work. Yeah. And so every morning we'd sit together and do like 1 or 2 hours of devotions as a group. And I hated it.
That's a lot.
I know. I found it super inefficient. I found it very frustrating, but also I was like, I was all snooty. I was like, well, I know Greek and Hebrew, and this is just dumb. And I was just kind of sitting grumpy in the corner for like a few weeks. during this time. Finally, this sweet old lady in the group called me out on it, and it really touched a chord. And I repented to the group and everything. But what I learned
I
in
think
the
Grumpy in the Corner could be your next book.
yeah,
Yeah,
Grumpy in the Corner,
yeah,
my
or at least a
memoir.
chapter in the book.
Yeah. But what I learned in the next, because I stayed there for 3 years, what I learned is how God speaks through everybody, and
Yes,
the
yeah,
and the types of things that my study would never yield. And
right.
so I lead our teaching team here at the Bay Church. And just yesterday, on Tuesdays, we have our teaching team meetings. There were 15 of us for 2.5 hours talking Bible. And I kind of initiate the conversation, but it's a freewheel and everybody contribute. And it's the best. And it makes it so much better on every level. So to
Yes.
what you're saying, that really
Well, and let me
is true.
commend you. I don't hear many churches saying, "I'm developing 15 teachers." That's brilliant. Please do
It's
more of that, everybody that's listening.
well, it's
Teachers
nice when you don't have to preach every weekend and you're like, no, that guy's gonna preach. She's
oh,
gonna
that's why
preach.
you yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's very developmental, I love that.
There's another angle here, Nancy, to the back to the issue of contribute or the overlap or the contributions from that world. But so my dissertation in many ways was about like servant leadership,
Mhm,
how love and power work together.
mhm. I love that.
And as I was studying it, I started to realize like the management consulting guru literature totally is fastened on this idea of servant leadership. Like Jim Collins, level 5 leader, Simon Sinek, leaders eat last,
Yep.
Adam Grant's whole thing about give and take. Really, you energize your career by giving.
Yes.
You see this in the military. You see this in social media. Like it's in the water. If the church thinks that only we are talking about servant leadership, we're
They'd be
super
wrong.
wrong.
They'd be wrong.
And it because it works.
Yes.
And I see that as a profound bridge
Yes.
between the way that the church is thinking
Yeah.
and it's ultimately an insight into who God is. So it's
And that
it's
we're
not
all
some
created
fringe insight.
right. That we're all created in his image.
Yes.
And this same VC that I've mentioned before, when he's given talks on faith and work, that intersection for some of our leaders, the question he always gets asked first is, "What do I do if I'm at work and I'm asked to do something unethical and I'm a Christian?" And he
Mhm.
doesn't breathe. He says that will never happen. It just won't happen.
Mm.
There's no way to build a business
Yeah.
on lies that's going
Mm.
to be sustainable. And he said Christians are so quick to characterize secular leaders as these wicked people. Most of them are following God in ways that we can't even imagine because of what you just
Right.
described.
Right. It's an interesting analog. My sister's in public health, and
Yeah.
she works with some of the most altruistic, driven people. And there's a certain thinness in the worldview, but in terms of the daily praxis, it's pretty
Mhm.
impressive.
Yes. Yes. I love
Hmm.
that. I love
Hmm.
that.
So, what does this mean then, Nancy? Like, okay, talk to me as a young pastor. How do I think about um, caring for my church? Am I there's different, and in fact, to bring up Willow, my dad was really influenced by Willow when it was driving, and it had to my vantage, a sort of managerial pastor as the ideal pastor as CEO. I don't
Mhm.
know a ton about Willow, to be honest with you,
Sure.
but that was sort of. And then there's this other stream of like Eugene Peterson type people who are like, no, pastor is apocalyptic, sacramental.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
I'm not running your bleeping church kind of guy.
That's
And so how do we tie these things together? Should we? How does that what is a pastor in light of what we're talking
right.
about?
That is a great question. And what's the distinction between a pastor and a leader? And is there one? The word
Yeah,
leader
that
is
is that's an important question.
well, I'm going to wait for you to answer that then. No, I'm kidding.
No,
I
I want to talk about that, but go ahead.
leader is not used that often in the Bible. Pastor and shepherd is used
Yeah,
a lot.
yeah.
But I think at the core of what you're asking is, to me, it's form and essence. So Bill at
Mm,
Willow and Eugene Peterson, this is the way they are wired.
mhm.
Bill came out of a family business. Eugene Peterson, his story, it was very different than that.
Hmm.
They are leading and pastoring out of who God wired them to be. So
Yeah.
why they feel like they need to argue with each other is a little beyond me. It's like, no,
Hmm.
Eugene is going to be Eugene and Bill is going to be Bill, and that will come with pros and cons for both of them.
Hmm.
I don't think there's any way that Eugene could say for any church of any size, you need some level of infrastructure.
Yeah.
I think for Bill, the challenge would be, how do I pastor and shepherd all these people if that's not my main wiring and gift?
Right.
But I do think, how do I learn whatever it is, if it's business practices, real estate wisdom, financial acumen,
Hmm.
shepherding, and the Bible? If I'm the leader of an organization that's a church, I want to get good at all those things, or not. I want to pull people around me and say, let's study all these different disciplines so that
Yeah.
our church can be healthier and healthier. And let's not ever let them lead the vision, but let's let them serve the vision.
Yeah. That's a good distinction. I know a pastor who, so to the issue of kind of what we're talking, I know a pastor who's sitting down interviewing a guy who wants to work at the church. Okay, what do you do? Well, I really love to journey with people, and I love to listen to people, and I love to walk with them. And the guy goes, dude, I'm not going to pay you to be a Christian.
I mean,
But
there's some truth in that statement. And yet, if
they're
you need somebody to be a shepherd leader of your small groups,
right.
it might be somebody like him.
Right, but it is amazing. My dad is wired as a leader very much, and I think for him, it's very salient that most pastors are not. They do not have a leadership gift,
Right, right.
and and my dad's actually a very savvy businessman. Like
Oh,
yeah,
incredibly so. And yet,
yeah,
and he's also a pastor.
yes, yeah, and our board has a lot of very, very, um, um, what's the word I'm looking for? People who've done amazing things in the business world, lead organizations, bank presidents, and so forth.
Yeah,
So we've got a team of people.
right.
Um,
Back to the T word again, aren't we?
right,
Yeah.
right. So Nancy,
Well,
you share.
honestly, the
Oh, go
few
ahead.
times I've sat down with your father, I have been so impressed by the business acumen and the tender heart.
Yeah,
The questions and statements he would ask me were from both places. Yeah,
yeah,
which was
yeah,
lovely.
yeah, yeah. I hope to be like him when I grow up,
Well,
potentially.
and be yourself. And be you.
So I want to circle back to you've shared with me a fascinating thought experiment about how Jesus would interact with McKinsey Consulting. Do you remember this?
I think so. I did
Yes.
a talk years ago called "If I Had Been Jesus' Leadership Consultant."
Right. And you would have put him on performance probation and evaluation.
For 4 things.
That's
And
right.
yeah. I
I've
just
got
kept
them written in front of me, but do you know them off the top of
yes,
your head?
keep hoping my audience would understand sarcasm. Yes, it was, maximizing.
Yes.
He had a life of 33 and a half years, and he used less than 10% of it, or just 10% of it
Mm-hmm.
in his ministry. He did not maximize his impact at all.
Mm.
The second one was language. If you want to start a movement, you talk about tsunamis and seismic shifts. You
Mm-hmm.
don't talk about salt and light and yeast and seeds.
Mm-hmm.
The third one was team. You
Mm-hmm.
look for the cream of the crop.
Yep.
Matthew the tax collector and Simon the zealot were as philosophically opposed to each other as
Mm-hmm.
fill in the blank with churches today.
Yep.
I'd fill it in, but then I'd get pigeonholed.
Yep.
Peter was the most publicly corrected disciple, and he's the one Jesus gave the keys of the kingdom to.
Right.
Simon or James and John, called sons of thunder. The Greek actually has a little bit more nuance. It almost leans towards sons of anger. This
Mm.
is who he chose. So the team was not impressive. And then the last one was his succession plan. Like, why would you turn it over to Peter?
Right.
And then we just unpacked, what did Jesus understand about leadership that I might be overlooking?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So yeah, I've wondered if McKinsey did ever go through with firing Jesus, obviously it's totally hypothetical,
Yeah.
would Jesus turn back around and hire McKinsey? Would he say, actually, I need you on my team to be thinking through some because I mean, the church that I'm at is an organization. There's 100 and some employees.
Yes.
There's the savvy infrastructure is a big part of what it means to be a
It's
pastor at a church
it's
like this.
necessary at
It
that level.
really is.
Yeah.
It really is. Hmm.
Well, I even think about, and again, I'll go back to what I said earlier. It doesn't matter if you're a family, a small run business, or a large corporation. When things become more complex, you need infrastructure. You and your wife have recently gone from just being married to having a baby. I'm
Yes.
guessing your infrastructure and your systems are starting to change a little bit.
Indeed.
They have to.
In
And
indeed.
nobody's saying bad family management. They're saying, oh, that's really smart.
Right, right. You know, I got baby gear coming out of every place in my life right now.
Of course you do. Of course. By the time the second one rolls around, you'll know which stuff you need and which stuff you don't need.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, Nancy, can we turn the whole question then around the other way? I mentioned in the intro that it's not just the church that is learning from these types
Mhm.
of thinking, but it's
Yeah.
also, when I look at the advertising industries and the way that corporations are positioning themselves, they are trying to tap into deeper purpose. They are trying to say the heroic, deeply meaningful life you want to live. Actually, we want to help you get there.
Yes.
And so talk about this, the way in which the church serves or the message of Jesus intersects with this deep yearning for
Yeah.
purpose.
Yes.
Can you talk about how you've seen that play out a little bit?
This is one of my favorite topics on the planet is that
Mm,
intersection of faith and work and how
mm,
churches have abdicated
mm,
uh, using that intersection for exponential purposes.
mhm,
Dallas Willard says your work is your primary place of discipleship.
mm,
Primary. And I
mm,
remember when he said it, we were in his backyard, and I said, "Oh no, no, it's got to be your family because that's always the right answer if you're a Christian." He said, "Nancy, just the nature of work.
mm,
Take somebody that's not sexy, successful, the farmer. 5 o'clock, it's dinner time. The kids are there. The meal is on the table, and the cow needs to be milked, and the fence is down.
mhm,
Easy choice. The nature of work requires a disproportionate amount of our time, and it is there. For churches to at least once a year do a 4-week series on faith and work,
mm,
or to get a small group curriculum that really speaks to faith and work and put that through their small groups once a year, to do a
mhm,
speaker series 2 or 3 times a year where you bring in a business leader or two and do a panel. Or there's a
mm,
church in Albany right next to Berkeley.
mm,
Andrew Hoffman is the senior pastor, and in 4 minutes a month he has a more lit up congregation around their vocation than anything I've seen in the Bay Area. 4 minutes a month. First Sunday of every month, he picks a domain of culture. When I first met him that weekend, it was going to be the field of law. He
mm,
said, I'm going to spend 2 minutes talking about why God created the field of law
mm,
to protect the marginalized in the
mm,
in the community, to
mm.
build a lattice where a healthy culture can grow. By the time he gets done with 2 minutes, you're thinking, man, I wish I was in the field of law. He
Yeah.
just puts that vision in front of you. And then he says,
Yeah.
for any of you that are in the field of law, I want you to stand. But before you do, I mean, judges, lawyers, paralegals, if you're the janitor in a law firm, stand up.
Mhm,
And then he says to the congregation, these are people who, Monday through Friday, go into the field of law and represent Jesus by their decision making, their team building, their
mm,
feedback, their
mm.
care for culture. We're going to pray for them. And then they do a 30-second video with somebody in that field talking about how they see their faith intersecting with their work.
Wow.
The school teachers in that church have told him, if you ever use June, July, or August to do school teachers, we're going to change churches because we're on vacation. We don't want to miss our month. He does
Wow.
education and entertainment and medicine and all
Wow.
the things. And in 4 minutes a month, he has his congregation thinking deeply about how do I bring my faith to work? Not just my dream job, but
Uh-huh.
the
Right.
job in which I'm stuck right now.
Right.
How do I serve people and live out my faith?
Right, right. Have you had any open doors, yourself to speak to people not on the church side, talking about work on the
Mhm.
church side, but talking about meaning in the corporate
Yes.
side?
Oh, when I worked with Pat Lencioni for 11 years as a business consultant.
I forgot
And
that on your resume. That's
yeah,
amazing.
right. One of my prayers was, how do I find one sentence that I
Mm,
can say that hints at this deeper meaning, but I
mm,
can't go into a corporation and lead as being a Christian. That would just
right.
be kind of rude.
Mm,
And the
right.
sentence I came
Mm,
up with was, whatever issues the company was facing, um, do you think, see if I can remember it now. Do you think that as we look at this problem, also thinking about how to bring a people solution to it will get us to the right answer? Something like that. It was better than
Hmm.
that. And I've never had a CEO say anything but absolutely. How do we do that?
Hmm.
How do we get at the people issues to solve the bigger problems? And
Hmm.
that opened up a number of conversations about meaning and purpose.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, because according to the Bible, our drive to change the world or our drive to have productive labor is intrinsic to the human vocation. And that whole idea about the disproportionate time of our life spent at work, that's been something as a young married person also I've been thinking about. It's like, well, I do have to work 8 hours a day.
Right.
Is that inappropriate if I'm also trying to be a good husband? Or and the
No.
margin for other things that you'd want to do seems smaller than you'd want.
Right.
But thinking about the that it's actually God's plan for work
Mhm.
to be a big block in our
Exactly.
life.
Well, let me ask you this. I do this in a talk sometimes where I'll actually ask people in the congregation or in the audience to call out an answer. How many times in Scripture do you think an occupation is mentioned?
Hmm. You're
And then
asking me?
yeah,
Oh,
let's start with you. How many times do you think an occupation is mentioned?
well, if you're considering farmer, fisherman,
Just
merchant,
answer the question,
I'd
Ryan.
say
Don't
almost
overthink this.
okay, 500 times.
Yeah. And I'll have people write down 543.
Okay.
Then everybody gasps. And then I say, add a three to that 5,433 times.
Wow.
Let's
Hmm.
just live in that wow long enough to say, what does the church do with that reality?
Hmm.
One of the churches I spoke at, and I'm going to be doing this
Hmm.
again in Chicago in a couple months, I spoke at about the intersection of faith and work. They put up signs over their exit doors inside their church building that say, now church begins.
Hmm.
Just
That's
as a
cool.
reminder that
Yeah.
when you go to your job, how you treat people, the
Hmm.
kind of work you do. I mean,
Hmm.
honestly, when people ask the question as a Christian, what's the most important thing I can do at work? Let's just start with do a great job.
Right.
Let's just
Right.
start there. And then let's
Right.
add other things to that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And
5,433 times. Just live in that
that
numerically.
that is an amazing Bible trivia, but more than trivia, you're right. It's pointing to something
Something.
massive
Yeah.
about what the Bible's trying to say to us.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes. Many years ago, I used to be a nurse.
Uh-huh.
And I worked in the emergency room, and my shift was almost over. I had been working multiple shifts
Mm.
because I was saving up money. I was going to quit, and I moved back to Chicago for a couple of months. I was going to finish my seminary degree back at Trinity.
Mhm.
So I was doing double shifts. I was exhausted. 11 o'clock rolled in. The new staff came in, and a new patient came in, 28-year-old woman. Uh, and I was just ready to go home. But the doctor said to me, Nancy, can you stay and admit her while we do report? It's like, I've been a Christian long enough to know you sin on the inside where nobody can see you. On the outside, I was like, sure, I'd be glad to. And on the inside, I'm like, I'm the only one that's been working double shifts. Why did he pick me? I'm exhausted. I want to go home. And
Mm.
then I went in and took her history and took her vitals, and I got even more frustrated. I'm thinking, it's 11 o'clock at night. You have the flu. Who comes to the hospital at 11 o'clock at night for the flu? Go to your doctor tomorrow.
Uh-huh.
Well, she was supposed to meet her husband and two kids up in the mountains the next day, but she had to stay back for work. So then the doctor said, hey, would you draw some blood work and stay till we get the results back? And I'm like, of course, I'd be glad to. I'm just fuming inside. And then her lab results came back on a fax machine. And I always tell the congregation, if you're under 40, you might have to Google that, but it's a machine that spits out paper with lab results on it. And I walked over to it before the doctor saw it and called him over. She didn't have the flu. She had fulminating leukemia.
Mm.
She never left the hospital. She was there for 6 weeks in the ICU.
Mm.
Ryan, by the time she died, I couldn't recognize her facially. She was so distorted. I met her husband, her children,
Mm.
and I stayed that night until 2 a.m. till her sister got there. And let me tell you, on the way home, I had one of the most difficult, tender, and in your face conversations with God where it felt like he said to me, oh, you're going to go study to be a pastor. Oh, you're going to go finish your seminary degree. I put one woman in front of you in a job you don't love anymore. It's not your passion. It's not your calling. And all I asked was for you to be pleasantly present. Now, she might have experienced me pleasantly, but that's not who I was. And so this is, again, another example of how I got discipled by Jesus in a job I didn't love by doing something I shouldn't have done.
That's a powerful story.
Yeah.
I'm going to ponder that.
Yeah.
And, I to what you were saying earlier about just be a really good employee and do excellent work.
Yes.
Part of the irony there is that there's some psychological studies that show that when we work really hard at hard things, we actually enjoy it more, or we enter what's called flow state, where we actually forget about ourselves and we're so doing the thing that
Yes.
when we come back to ourselves sometime later, we have grown, we have changed, and it's a very pleasant thing. And so the irony is that in people's reported satisfaction about when they're actually happier, are they happier when they're relaxing off work, or are they happier when they're working really hard? They're actually happier when they're working really hard.
Yes.
And so the whole idea of just working really hard as a Christian is not just for the sake of being a good witness to others.
Right.
It's also partly of how you're enriching your own life in your
Well
own.
said.
It's a
So
real
well.
irony, you know.
And it's not just, again, I get weary of, and it's my generation and younger generations. What's my passion? What's my calling? It's all about me. And it's like, what if you don't have the luxury of finding your passion and calling in life and you have to work 2 jobs to put food on the table? How then can I bring Christ to that? And what you just said is one of the main ways. Yes.
Well, and if you think about the Bible too, and 5,400 and whatever mentions, if you're in the Bible times, if daddy's a shepherd, you're a shepherd. If daddy's a farmer, you're
That's
a
right.
farmer.
That's
You're
right.
not
Daddy's your
finding your passion. You're not
You're not
playing your
asking,
options. It's clear. This is what you're doing with your life. Get used to it.
yes, and you're not asking, is 8 hours a day too much to work?
Right, exactly.
You're
I'm
not
going to
asking.
call HR. My dad asked me to get up too early. This is
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we have a bunch of interns this summer, and the other day we were doing this little panel, and I was just like going off on work ethic. And if it's not in your job description, it's okay. And then afterwards, I was like, man, did I go overboard? And one of our senior leaders was like, no, that was great. That was good. Good. Get him,
Don't take this
work
credit,
ethic.
but yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great.
So much to think about here, Nancy.
Yeah.
Are we missing any big angles? Are there any big topics in this that the unknown? What
Mm.
should we be thinking about that we haven't yet talked about?
Wow. I think the thing that comes into my mind, we touched on it a little bit, but the false secular sacred divide, that the church is this sacred institution and business isn't.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are elements of truth to that, but I think business is a sacred calling. Absolutely. So how do we change our language to be more not only inclusive but integrated, so that we see that and we really honor those roles as much as we do a pastoral role. And I think for churches to take very seriously, how will I help my congregants embrace their job and show up full of life and ready to admit mistakes if they made it, but really, like you said, working really hard and finding the joy in that.
Yeah, part of the shift there, the sacred secular divide and stuff, is part of the task, I think, of theology in our time, because
Yes.
this has been one of the big contributions of N.T. Wright and the people around him, is that crept into the church early on a sort of Platonizing dualism, where the world of spirit is good and the world of matter and bodies and the world we live in is actually downgraded and not so good.
Right.
But that's a very Hellenistic way of viewing the world. It's actually not biblical. It's actually
Not
not
even
the
close.
Hebrew Bible. And so
Right.
actually dignifying, re-sacralizing the material order, I think, and exploring that in the many ways that the Bible does, is essential foundation
Yes.
for for shifting that sacred secular divide that very often downgrades so-called secular work.
I think you've positioned it well. The theological thinking that informs our praxis needs to be more robust and more
Right.
biblical.
Yeah.
And then, and then how do you take that into praxis, and what does that look like, and have the two inform each other instead of standing apart from each other?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. I'm curious. You mentioned that you taught a little bit at Stanford Business School on a
just one day a
case
year.
study. Yeah, one day your case study on Willow Creek.
Yeah.
And were the students curious about what
It
kind of questions did they ask?
So the
I'm curious
professor that
about that.
called me to ask me if I would do this, the first thing he said is, you have to know, in this semester class, we study many different organizations. The two where the class actually gets vitriolic is Planned Parenthood and the Willow Creek case study. And I said, I'm there. If there's that much energy, I want to be a
That's
part of
hilarious.
that.
Yeah.
It was fascinating. Almost every time I did it, I probably did it for 4 or 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
Um, there was definitely palpable, close to hostility in the room. Now,
Wow.
afterwards, I would find there were a few Christians in there. But what was interesting, I never brought my Bible in with me. We did a SWOT exercise on the case study that Jimmy Mayato actually did when he was a Harvard business student before he came to work at Willow for the association.
Hmm.
And the question that came up over and over and over again, and many of these people had been hurt in churches, in their
Mm-hmm.
youth groups, or have
Mm-hmm.
just never gone to church.
Mm-hmm.
But the question that kept rising to the surface is, this is great that you guys believe this, but why do you have to go put this on other people? Why do you have to evangelize? Why do you have to try to change people's minds?
Hmm.
And again, it was one of those times I'm sitting there thinking, I'm not quite sure how to respond to this, but I feel the weight of it.
Hmm.
And so I just retold, without a Bible in front of me, the story in, is it Luke 14, of the feast, and the master sent the servants out to
Hmm.
invite people to come.
Mm-hmm.
And I just retold that in regular words and said,
Hmm.
when the servants came back and said, oh man, the excuses were so lame, like,
Hmm.
what do we do now?
Huh.
And the master said, well, go to the alleys and find the blind and the lame and bring them in, so that
Mm-hmm.
my house may be full. And Brian, I have goosebumps right now. Every time I did that, you could hear a pin drop when I got done, every
Hmm.
time. And it made me think, they don't know what Jesus said. They're
Yeah.
reacting against
Yeah.
our poor behavior sometimes, and just religion in general.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. God has blessed you with a rich life, my friend. Of a lot of
No,
amazing
that's just a good
settings.
reminder.
A lot
That
of
is a
settings
good
He's put you
reminder.
in to be a witness in amazing ways.
And to plant a seed. That's all just the seed.
Mm-hmm.
Just the
Mm-hmm.
seed. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Nancy,
You're
for
welcome.
taking some
Thanks for
time with
having me.
us.
It's a great conversation.
Yeah, same. I'm going to listen to it, I think, multiple times and try to learn. And I'm going to steal some ideas for our teaching team. No, I'm a serial plagiarizer from good ideas. So,
Thank you. You're such a learner and you're such a teacher. I think in the model of learning design, what are the things we have to unlearn? Which goes to your theology of the Bible, which really values physical nature. What
mm-hmm.
are all the things we have to unlearn so that we can move forward, getting it more and more right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's one of your gifts to the kingdom.
I will be sitting and thinking with that.
Great.
Thank you so much, Nancy
You're
Ortberg.
welcome.
Appreciate it.
Thanks. Thanks,
Okay.
Ryan.
Hey,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Thanks so much for listening to this. Deeper's a ministry of the Bay Church. We're in the Bay Area of California. Love to see you sometime in person or online. Check us out, thebay.church. And that's all. Until next time, as the rabbis say, shalom, me homies. Okay, bye-bye.